Hey folks, Matt Easton here, scholagladiatoria. So this is a sort of random off-the-cuff topic, but recently, or shall we say in the last probably about 3 or 4 months, I've not been training as hard as I used to. And this has had a real impact on me actually, and it's made me realise a few things about training and a little bit of advice to give to people who are either getting into HEMA, getting back into HEMA, or who are just doing HEMA all the time. And one of those things is that really regularity of movement, and I'll specify that in a minute, is something that's really, really important to just kind of keeping your game up, so to speak. Now, in the past, I've often mused that there are some people I know who do tons and tons and tons of sparring, and yet they don't seem to be noticeably better than the people I know who don't do so much sparring. I'm not sure I've got a decent explanation for that. I think I've always in my mind thought that one of the reasons for it is that lots of people spar without analysing what they're doing. So they're just essentially repeating the same behaviours and same movements, same things, doing the same stuff again and again and again and again, and not really improving it. Now, there are some things that will inherently improve if you do them over and over and over and over and over again. You will get slightly more reliable at timing and distance management. You will gradually, there will be a form of evolution in the things that you do. So some of the things that repeatedly don't work, you'll probably stop doing, which is not necessarily a good thing because they might not be working because you're not doing them necessarily correctly or in the right context. And things that do work for you, you'll probably do more, which again isn't necessarily always a good thing because you might become more predictable for that. You might start to rely on fewer and fewer techniques or less and less repertoire, but just kind of tweak those things. One thing on that incidentally, so there's a famous quote, I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember the exact wording of it, by Bruce Lee, where he says something like, fear not the man who knows 1,000 kicks, but fear the man who has practiced one kick 1,000 times, or something like that. And I sort of agree with that. And I think, you know, I'm not going to be the person to stand up and argue with Bruce Lee. But I think in essence that's sort of correct. But also there's a flip side to it. There's another edge to that sword, as it were, and that is that if you only do one thing, you're incredibly predictable. It doesn't matter how good you are at that thing. So I was saying this to one of my students the other night, you know, to me, one of the most important things to having success in fights is being able to change the way you fight. And I know a lot of people who are fundamentally good fencers, but they only fence in one way. And the problem is, even if that one way works against 9 out of 10 people, when you come up against the 1 out of 10 people that your method just will not work against, doesn't matter, they might be, relatively speaking, overall, you know, if you each fought 100 people, you might have a better success rate than them, so you may be a better fencer than them, but the way that you fight just doesn't work against them. And I've experienced this myself over the however many years I've been doing HEMA and sport fencing before that if you have certain things that work really, really well for you, of course you become reliant on those and you use them lots, but then you find someone that it just doesn't work against. Doesn't necessarily mean that you don't hit the person, but you find that they double against you when you do that, or they hit you with after blows, or there are other, you know, various reasons why that one thing that you normally works well for you doesn't work well in that scenario. And incidentally, it also applies to other contexts as well. In that if we take a really simplistic kind of top level view, using a saber in an unarmoured environment, you could be really, really great at doing all of the repertoire of fighting in unarmoured style with a saber, and suddenly you throw in a little bit of armour into the mix. Imagine suddenly everyone's wearing turbans or helmets and maybe thick clothing, and suddenly a whole load of your saber repertoire doesn't work very well anymore. And your reflex actions, for example, most people I experience when I'm doing saber have a reflex action of making a riposte at the head. Now imagine everybody's suddenly got head protection on, and I have literally experienced this myself, and I have riposted to someone's head when the agreement was that we assume that there's head protection. And I'm like, brilliant. You know, I put a guard in, boom, I hit them on the head, and then they hit me on the body. And it's like, crap. If that was real life, I've now hit someone on their helmet, does nothing at all, ding, nothing, ding, it's not going to do anything, and they've potentially killed me or very badly wounded me in return. So, you know, the changing of context can massively change what works and what doesn't work, and whether you are I won't say good fighter, but whether your way of fighting is effective in that given context or not. There are other contexts as well, multiple opponents, or all of this kind of thing, if your weapon's a little bit shorter than you're used to, and these kind of things. But going back to the main point, so in the last 3 or 4 months I have not been training as hard. I've been training as often, but I've not been training as hard as I had done maybe in the previous year. And I have really felt it. My fitness level's gone down, my speed, my reflex, not so much reflex in terms of what my brain wants to do, but my reflex in terms of, for example, parry riposte is not as quick as it was a year ago, for example. And there are a number of reasons for that. I've had an injury, minor one, nothing to write home about, but it's meant that I've deliberately trained less to let the injury recover. I'm 40 years old now, so unfortunately injuries take longer to recover. I never seemed to get injuries when I was younger. It's just the way that biology works, unfortunately. You hit 35, 40 and you start to get more injuries and they take longer to recover from. And various other reasons. My job's been very stressful, my day job that is, rather than all the other jobs I do. But my job's been very stressful, you know, health stuff, all sorts of reasons. I haven't been training as hard in the last 6 months, shall we say, 4 months, 6 months, as I had done previously, and it really, really makes a huge difference. And so this is where we come around to my advice. My advice is, no matter what's going on, if you want to keep your kind of A game up, try and keep your body moving as often as possible. I've become, I was going to say sedentary. I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as sedentary because part of my commute to work involves cycling. I walk a fair bit, and I'm still running 1.5 HEMA classes per week. So I'm not sedentary, but when you change the level slightly, you really notice an impact, especially if you're over 30. I would say over 35 maybe. So my advice is try and keep moving. And try and keep doing as much as you can, because if you reduce it, you will notice the difference, especially if you're trying to perform at the top level or with the best fencers. You will really notice against them when your level goes down. And what I was, just to link back into what I was saying about the sparring, so I noticed that people who do sparring more than others aren't necessarily better at sparring than others. And there's all sorts of complex reasons for that. The main reason being what I mentioned, that I think that it's because they're not necessarily sparring effectively, they're just repeating the same old behaviours over and over and over again. But what they do get from it is exactly what I'm mostly talking about in this video, and that is they're keeping their bodies at kind of peak operating level. And you know, if you're coming back into HEMA or you're getting into HEMA, it is really, don't underestimate how just being fit is really, really useful. And you know, in the past I may have given the impression that you know, you don't need to be a marathon runner to be a great fencer. Yes, in reality, most fights, even if they're in armour, which are probably perhaps some of the longest fights, because obviously it takes a long time to wound someone through armour, because it's quite difficult to get past the armour. But even if you're doing fights which are relatively long, for example, certain types of wrestling, but even if you're doing small sword or sabre, where one hit might incapacitate someone, even there, where the fight might be short, the fight might only last seconds, still having the fitness there, not only the stamina, but in terms of your muscles being used to doing these quick reflex motions is really, really super useful. So if you're getting back into HEMA or getting into HEMA, being as active as you possibly can and spending as much time as you can moving around with your weapon, whatever your preferred weapon is, or not weapon if you're specialising in unarmed fighting arts, but spending as much time as possible just moving around. And also different types of physical activity are going to be beneficial. They may not seem directly beneficial, but if it's cycling, walking, running, swimming, these kind of things, you know, it's badminton, tennis, other sports, you know, anything which keeps you active is going to be beneficial. And the more sedentary you become, the slower the slower you're going to be, the less stamina you're going to have. So, you know, I'm not breaking any news flashes to anyone here. Clearly, being fit is greatly beneficial. Being strong is beneficial. I would argue that for most, at least unarmoured fighting styles, being fit is more important than being strong, because strength over a certain amount is, I would argue, more or less superfluous, whereas fitness is pretty much always going to be beneficial. So there we go. I think just to wrap it up, if whatever level you're at, just try and do what you can, and I would say try and fit it into everyday life as well. I have terrible self-motivation at exercise. Luckily, I'm blessed with a metabolism that means that I can eat lots of chocolate, and it doesn't necessarily make me particularly larger. I know I do sometimes I get a bit fatter, a bit fatter, a bit thinner, but generally speaking, I'm quite lucky. But I am also fairly active as well. And whatever size and shape and fitness level you're at, just trying to do a little bit more as part of your daily routine. You know, maybe walking to the shop instead of getting the car, or you know, maybe walking faster than you normally do instead of ambling along. See if you can walk a little bit faster to the bus stop or to the office or whatever. You know, moving things around, lifting things. Obviously, if you want to go to the gym, that's going to be beneficial, but very often when people, especially men, have a habit of going to the gym and just doing the things that they think are going to make them look more buff, and don't necessarily think about actually their fitness, their aerobic fitness. So there we go. I have terrible self-motivation at exercise, and I'm paying the price right now. I'm trying to get back into the swing of things, not only for my sort of circulation and aerobic fitness, but also because one is linked to the other in terms of how much you can exercise during a session. It's affecting my strength as well, and my strength is not what it was at the moment, so I'm trying to get back there. So there we go, folks. Try and stick with it, and try and make it as much of your daily routine as possible. I'm not an exercise expert, I'm just really talking about my own experience here, and I'm paying the price for being a lazy bastard for the last few months. Cheers, folks.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on Facebook. You can buy t-shirts through Spreadshirt, support us on Patreon, or follow us on Pinterest. Thank you.